Today we're going to look at the available free agents for what is arguably our biggest need on the roster, which is wide receiver, especially with not many receivers being on the roster and not having a true number one. So now that the insanity of this year's free agency seems to be settling down, and the shock of Davante Adams being traded, which I did not see at all. Let's look at the top 5 receivers left in free agency that we can sign and replace Davante Adams as best as we can. Odell comes in at number 5 on this list, but could be higher if he didn't tear his ACL in the Super Bowl. He is 29 years of age, and in his short term with the Rams shown, he can still be a high impact guy. Now, in his tenure with the Rams, we're not going to include Cleveland on this because, well, it's Baker. With the Rams, Odell ended up starting 7 games, and his short tenure there ended up with 27 catches, 305 yards, and 5 touchdowns, which is pretty good. Me personally, I feel like Odell might be the best receiver to sign in this free agency if it wasn't for that injury. And a lot of teams are probably just doing a wait and see approach to see how his ACL is responding to the surgery, and probably will be signed after the NFL draft once they get more information and where the draft lays out. At number 4, we have a player who I actually really like as a player, and that is Jarvis Landry. Jarvis is coming in at 29 years old, so he is still on the young side with Odell Beckham. Now, Jarvis is a high targeted receiver with 7 of the 8 past years having over 100 targets, with only one of the years being under 100, but he still landed 87 targets. The reason why Jarvis is a lot lower on this list, even though I am a big fan of his, is unfortunately he typically plays in the slot, where we don't have an entire need for him, especially with Randall Cobb and Amari Rodgers on the roster. Now, Cobb has been injury prone, so having Jarvis there, who actually has been a very reasonably healthy person for most of his career, could slide in when Cobb inevitably gets hurt. Still paying a player a lot of money to play the slot when it's not exactly a need when we're trying to replace Davante Adams. Especially since there are rumors that he fired his agent because he hasn't been signed since the beginning of free agency and has been asking for $20+ million a year, which if we didn't sign Davante Adams, there's no way we're going to sign Jarvis Landry for $20 million a year. At number 3, we have Emmanuel Sanders, who I haven't really heard much news on this entire free agency. Now, he is the oldest wide receiver that I have on my list, coming in at 35 years old. But last year with Buffalo, he still had a reasonable 45 catches for 678 yards and 5 touchdowns. He still has a lot of his speed to where he can take the top off the defense and is a deep threat. He is also a receiver that can line up not only in the slot but also on the boundary line and can win on all 3 phases in the game, whether it be short, middle, or of course deep. In my opinion, we really should sign Emmanuel Sanders, even if we go towards another free agent receiver. If Emmanuel Sanders can be our number 2 receiver and take the top off the defense and be a legitimate deep threat that we don't have now with MVS being gone. And number 2, we have Julio freaking Jones. Now, shocking or unshocking, depending on how you look at it, Julio Jones has yet to be signed this year. He is on the older side at 33 years old and is kind of a name recognition at this point in his career, as he has only played 19 games over the past 2 seasons and has had a few hamstring injuries through each of those years. Now, despite the age and the history of injuries he's had, I still think if the money is right, we should sign him. Defenses would have to respect him, and in his last game in the playoffs, he still looks good and has shown flashes that the talent is still there. He's also played with Matt LaFleur over in Atlanta and could come over to have a resurgence late in his career, especially since he'll be receiving passes from the back-to-back MVP and Aaron Rodgers. And lastly, at number 1, we have Will Fuller. Will Fuller is probably the best receiver that's available in free agency. Will Fuller is 27 years old, so he is entering the prime of his career, essentially. The Packers have shown interest in Will Fuller in previous years, especially 2 years ago when we tried to trade for him from the Houston Texans, which did work out in his favor as he was suspended shortly after. And of course, last year he was injured for most of the season and only showed up in a couple games. Now, with his history over the past 2 years, with the suspension and then pretty much being out all last year, he shouldn't come too much out of an expense with the salary cap. He has the speed that Matt LaFleur is looking for, that we desperately need in this offense. We have no type of speed. Allen Lazard, Randall Cobb, and Amari Rodgers do not put fear into the defenses. With that, that'll wrap up my top 5 list of free agents we should sign to replace Davante Adams. Of course, even if we sign one of these free agents that I would personally like to see the Packers sign, I believe we should still at least draft a receiver in the NFL draft and also consider trading for a receiver. Me personally, I would like to see the Packers try to trade for Brandon Cooks, as he is constantly produced under a plethora of quarterbacks, good and bad. So thank you for watching this video on this week's top 5. Now, if you like this video, please give it a like. Also, drop down in the comments and tell me who you would like to see the Packers sign in this free agency. And as always, go Pack Go.